Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016. And after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And it's taken me quite some time to come to the mic to tell it, but I knew it was an important one to tell. So here I am to share his story and mine with you. And it's important that I tell the story of the surviving sibling, the forgotten mourner, the story that is not told enough. So thank you for coming with me on this journey, and thank you for listening to my story. Grief hits us in waves, and even though I had received this incredible amount of information and answers from Detective G in 2020, and I felt like I had been given so much from him, and being told that there's really no such thing as closure, but we just crave answers, and getting that knowledge from him and that empathy and depth, but also the answers was huge. But I felt grief come across me again at year 5. And year 5 was, of course, 2021. And as a world, we're in a world pandemic, it was affecting me deeply, as I've shared. As an extrovert, it was really affecting me. I'm growing my business. At the time, I was starting to have more than one business, and I do now, of course. But I felt like, yes, I had received the answers, and I felt like that was right and true, and Detective G was so spot on with that. Like that quote, that phrase just, oh God, it still hangs with me on a daily basis. But year 5 hit me really hard. And I was like, it was like a process. It was like almost like a plant, rebirthing itself. And I was beginning to be fascinated again with the grieving process. And I almost started to fear that I was regressing, which I'm sure some of you can relate to if you're further along in your grief journey. And if you guys are just starting out your grief journey, you're probably like, oh my God, I feel like I'm just like, I can't get out of bed some days. I'm really struggling. Like, I started to go through that again. Like, I was doing some of the things that I was struggling with back then. Like, I was, sometimes when, going out, drinking a little too much, or, at night drinking a whole bottle of wine, or I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Like, I'm kind of regressing a little bit. But I realize now, like, no, it's not regressing. It's the evolution of grief. It's a journey. It's the ebb and flow, and kind of like I was mentioning, like this life cycle of a plant. Like, you kind of go under and then you come back up and you grow, you're kind of like a plant. And so coming back up again, coming back to life. And I felt like I was back under the ground again. That's what I felt like. And so I got kind of fascinated with that and ingrained in that mindset, because I always seek to understand. I wanted to know, and I kind of felt like there was a little bit more to know about my brother and his journey. And there was only so many answers I could get out of like the factual side. I felt like, okay, let's tap into the spiritual. And so I started taking some classes, and I had some coaches and some mentors, and I started doing some meditating, and my brother was visiting me in some dreams. And it's interesting because my brother, I didn't mention this on previous episodes, but my brother was always coming to me when there was family news. And so both of my sisters have children, and my sister, who's a year younger than me, had a child in 2020, and my brother visited me in 2019 when I was really struggling and feeling like I failed him. He visited me quite often in 2019, And there was one dream where he visited me, and it was like very gossipy. And he was like, oh, your sister, like the one that's a year younger than me, she's going to have a child. It's going to be a boy, and telling me all these things. And I'm like, okay, whatever, Andreas. He was always like the gossip. He was always the funny one in the family. Oh, it was so true. She did. She had a son in 2020. And it still weirds me out to this day. And he came to me again and told me about my other sister having a child too. And lo and behold, I see her on, social media, and she's with child. And I knew it was going to be a boy too, because he told me that too. It was weird. So stay connected to your loved ones, because they will appear to you. But I was really getting into like meditating, and like I am, for those of you who know me or will get to know me, I am not a meditating person. I am like so high energy, so extroverted. Like I've really had to struggle to try to get into like those states of mind, because slowing down my mind and being present in the moment, it's been really positive for me. But it's also opened me up to being connected to him and connected to myself, which is so important. And also helping with my physical body, and what I described in my previous episodes, going through the accident that I went through, because I was a runner for a long time and I can't run anymore. So that changed my physical body and how I was always so super tiny. So I really had to change all these things. Well, I was able to start to kind of connect with him, like not even in a dream anymore. It was just like, I can slow my mind down, and like I can feel him, and like he will come to me. And I'm by no means like a psychic medium or anything like that, but I do think you can connect to your loved ones, and I believe in it. I hear other people say it all the time, and it's true. My brother, his flower is a sunflower, and I never used to see those ever anywhere. They're all over the place now. Like they show up everywhere. Like randomly, there's like next door to my house, a sunflower popped up growing. I live in the city. Like weird. I mean, I can tell you so many stories of that. And then monarch butterflies, like they show up in random places. Or like just the other day, I went to go buy my girlfriend some flowers. I was going to her new house for the first time, and I picked up the flowers to get them for her, and there was this like fake little monarch butterfly stuck in there. It was like a decoration. Just weird stuff like that like. And I looked in the other flowers, and there wasn't one. There was like different butterflies in the other ones. Why did I pick that one? Like I wasn't really making a conscious choice. So, and those are just random examples, but there's ones, where it's just been freaky, like just weird, things that have happened. And I've also asked him for a sign too, and I'll like turn the corner, and then there's a sign of my brother. Or like I've asked for a sign, and then Goo Goo Dolls are playing, and that was like always his music he would dance to as a kid. I know it sounds funny, but it's I'm sure you guys can relate to this. Think of those things, and they will show you. Like I believe that's how they speak to you. So I became 2021 was a very spiritual time for me, but it was also like this sad time. I think of it like again as a plant underground, and I was feeling it was a mixture of things. I was excited about my business, and then also like emotionally going through a lot. And I'm like, why is year 5 hitting me so hard? Like, this is really weird. So I went through coping again, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to add to my tattoo. And so I decided that I was going to get the sunflower for my brother, and a rose, because that is, my mom had a flower for each one of us, which is why my brother's a sunflower and I'm a rose. And my sisters are a lily and a violet. So I was like, I'm going to do the two of us together. I'm going to have him be the bigger one as the sunflower, because, he has passed, and I'll be the rose that's still living and like still has a lot of life to live, and have that next to that thing. So that was one thing I did, because I was like, it's a much bigger tattoo than the other one. I got a lot braver, a lot ballsier now. But I had to reschedule multiple times because I got so busy with my business. And this is an interesting story. And so I end up not really paying attention to the date, and I get there finally, and this tattoo artist is super awesome. Like, he really specializes in a couple things, and one thing is flowers. And so he had mocked up the design, and I was obsessed with it. I still love it, which is good. It's on your body. And I've been super anti-tattoo, like, a lot of my life, as I've mentioned earlier, in earlier podcasts. And then, that all went out the window when you go through, like, loss. And I'd always had it, like, on my boyfriends, and it wasn't a big deal. And, like, my husband has a ton of tattoos. But just for me, I, like, could never make the commitment. And then it was, like, lost my brother. I'm like, okay, ashes in my body, here we go. Like, totally, let's do this. And now I have, like, these huge flowers. So I'm laying there, it takes a couple hours to do these big tattoos, as those of you who have big tattoos know. Even a little tattoo, it takes time. So he's sitting there talking to me about it, and I'm like, yeah, it's year 5, it's really hitting me. And he kind of, like, looks at me, and he's listening to the story. It's like, this was me practicing, I didn't realize, sharing the story very openly. And he kind of, like, stops at one point. And he was, like, very persistent about going. And I deal pretty well with pain. I think, no offense, guys, but I think women deal pretty well with pain. And a lot of you guys do well with the tattoos, too. I mean, my husband's, like, totally tatted up on the back. But anyway, he, like, stops tattooing. And I'm like, what? Like, what's the deal? And he's like, today's, like, the 5th. And I'm like, okay. Like, he's like, no, like, it's May 5th. And I was like, you might not think that's weird, but I think as surviving siblings, like, there are signs. And I didn't pick that day. Like, he picked that day. So it was the 5th year on the 5th month of the 5th day. Yeah, of his death. And it freaked me out a little bit. So again, it was just like a sign. Like, I believe in this stuff. I really do. And so this year, like, 2021 was very spiritual that year. And so I would get, again, I had dreams with him in the past visiting me. And then I had a very specific dream that happened. So again, got my tattoo, loved it, by the way. We'll post pictures. And if you follow me on social, you can see it. I love sharing, and I've had people reach out, and some of you guys have sunflower tattoos too, which I think is so cool. I love that. I love the commemoration. I think it's a beautiful way to commemorate your loved one, if that's your thing. But I had my brother visiting me quite frequently because I kind of opened this up. So I think I'm not a therapist, I'm not a spiritual guru, but I'm getting into spiritual stuff here, so I kind of have to give that disclaimer. But if you're open to this, if you're not, it's cool. But I definitely became open to this because I had gotten these, the logical answers that I needed. So you have to go on your journey of what you need, but I got those and what I needed. Do I still go through moments where I'm angry and I want more answers? Yes, absolutely. Do I know that that's enough answers to know that I know exactly what happened? For the most part, yeah, I do. I know what happened to him, as I laid out in the previous episode. I know what happened. Detective G filled in enough blanks. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Obviously, he was murdered. And I got enough information from, the cryptic messages and phone calls and things like that. And I knew it was, and, I don't know if I filled that in the previous episode, but I knew it was over $600, which is disgusting. It's disgusting. And so I really needed to go on this more of a spiritual side of the journey for me, because I personally do. I believe in God. I do. That's my personal belief. But whatever you believe in, the universe, God, I believe in it in more of a universe way. This is just me sharing personally with you. But whatever you believe in and whatever spiritual journey you want to go on, I do believe in you connecting in whatever way you want to. And this was my journey in 2021. So I was meditating and connecting, and he would come through to me a lot in dreams because I kind of opened this. I don't know how else to say it. Maybe it sounds cheesy to you guys, but portal to him. So he was with me a lot. So much so that I would have, and this happens to me now, I have like people who have like that are mediums come up to me and talk to me about him, which I'm going to talk about towards the end of this episode. But they'll like come up and talk to me about him, and it's really wild. But I didn't realize what I was doing in the beginning with that. And I'm okay with it now, but it was a little bit much to start out with, because he was around me, and like I was starting to like, in my meditations, like he would speak to me about like things. I would ask him like questions, how do you feel about, just business stuff. I would talk to him, bounce things off. And it's interesting because this is very personal, but I want to share it. I want to be really open and raw, and this is how he was. This is a little bit of me channeling him into this. He appears to me in, like when I see him in dreams most of the time, and when I meditate and see him and I'm in this like meditative state, which I never thought I would like get to this place where I do these kinds of things, but he appears to me typically in overalls, and he has like blonder hair and he's young. So I know that's like when his happiest time was. I had to kind of like read on that and learn about that from a few like coaches and mentors, because I didn't really understand. I'm like, why does he look so young? Like he died when he was 27. He was super young, but I didn't really understand that. But he's kind of always bouncing around as a kid. And like when I went to where his ashes are and everything at the creek this past year by myself for the first time, I just went by myself. That was like a huge thing too. That was interesting, and I meditated, I sat there. And the year before this happened though too, I didn't go by myself, but I could like, he came to me, like it was a huge thing. And this might sound a little woo-woo for some of you, so sorry if it does, but like this was a part of the journey. 2021 was the spiritual part of the journey for me. And I learned that like that's how he appears, like kind of like a Huckleberry Finn type of person, but like that's when him and I were happiest, and when we connected really, really strong as children, like really bonded, like used to like sleep in bunk beds together, or even in the same bed sometimes, like really young kids. So it started to make sense and connect. At one point I had a dream. This is one of the most vivid dreams I have of him after passing. There's so many. This is why I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't fit this all on a podcast. It's gonna have to probably roll into a book. But this is crazy, all of the stuff that's come out, and I appreciate you guys listening to this, and I hope it's helping you as a surviving sibling or as a supporter. But I remember being really connected and really opening up, and he came to me in this dream, and it was an intense dream. I couldn't tell if it was real or not. And I'm sure you guys have had those. It typically will happen too, like right after they pass or a couple months after they pass. I had a couple of those where like I thought he was still alive and then he wasn't. And I'm sure you've gone through that, like, or you've connected with that if that's happened to you, like had a dream. I had a lot of those, like in the first, 2017, that first like year. I still think he was alive. I'd wake up and that was like, this was kind of like that, but not. So what happened in the dream, I thought it was real. I thought he was alive again, but like logically enough time had passed where I could kind of get myself out of it when I woke up. But we were in this home. It was very contemporary, and he was like, his head was down, and I was a little bit older in the dream. It looked like I was closer to my 40s, and he was so upset. He was like having a breakdown, and I was trying to console him, and the dream went on for a long time, and I didn't know what he was so upset about. We had these long conversations about different things, about life, and he finally broke down, and he was like, everyone's going to forget me. Everyone's forgotten me. Even you're forgetting me. And just had this total meltdown in the dream, and it really rocked me. It really disturbed me. And maybe disturbed is the wrong term, but like it shook me for like a good 24 to 48 hours. I mean, I remember going to like one of the coaches I was working with at the time about it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, this is really intense, and like kind of meditating on it. And I did, I want to disclaim this too. I've been in therapy for a very long time, very long time, and even prior to my brother's passing. And then obviously have sought therapy for my brother's passing. So, coming from the family that I came from, obviously went to therapy for that. And then, traumas that I went through in the past, but then obviously for my brother's passing too. But this was intense. And I then was able to, coming out of it, unpack. I was like, wow. I'm like, no, I get it. I get what he's saying. Like, he feels... This is real. I really think this is really him coming through to me. I really did feel that. And I think that you have to interpret these dreams however they feel to you. This is your relationship. This is your grief journey. And I really, really, truly believe that. And for me, this was my brother telling me that he felt like no one else cared about him. No one else cared about the fact that he had passed. And this makes me so emotional. And it broke me that I almost felt like he was lumping me in. And I was like, oh my God, like, how can he feel this way? Like, I think this, I can't remember exactly when this was, but I think it was before I got my tattoo. And I got my tattoo and, stuff like that. And that didn't have any influence over it because I'd scheduled myself to get the tattoo like early in the year and it kept getting rescheduled. That's why it was so weird that it happened on 5/5 and then year 5. But that dream was like, okay. It was like, I knew there was like a messaging behind it and a feeling like he didn't want to be forgotten about. He wants his story to be told. He wants our family also to know what happened to him, the answers to go out. And it broke my heart because I didn't have a relationship with anybody in the family. Well, I had exchanged from time to time an email here and there with my dad. Like, we didn't have a relationship. It wasn't, it wasn't bad, it wasn't good, and I love him. I love all of my family, but it is what it is. But I could tell it was killing him that he felt forgotten about. He felt like he wasn't a part of this family anymore. And I feel the pain in my heart right now even telling you guys this because it was real. It was real. It was a dream, but it was real. And I was so disturbed by this. So that was kind of the beginning of something for me too. And I think year 5 was just hard. And so I started to seek resources. I was like, there's got to be groups out here. Like, why wasn't there groups out here for surviving siblings? And so I started joining Facebook groups and I'm like, oh my God, there is people out here. Okay. I'm like, all right, there are more people out here that have gone through this. Okay. Thank God. Like, why wasn't I looking for this back then? Doesn't matter. Can't go back. Let's go forward. And I started reading other people's stories and how they were suffering and struggling. And I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm not alone, but these people have these groups. Like, all right, what do we have for books and podcasts? And so I looked. The amount of books that we had, I mean, I could count them on 2 hands. It was ridiculously depressing. I ordered them all. I ordered them all like a crazy person. I ordered them all. I mean, maybe that's not crazy, but I was like, I'm going to order every single one, read every single one. I did. And simultaneously, I looked up podcasts. I literally found one podcast of a very sweet lady that lost her brother, I think 22 years ago or something. I've actually connected with her. She talks about the loss of her brother, but that was it. I mean, there's nothing really out there recounting something very consistently or putting out consistent information about surviving siblings. So there's essentially no podcasts out there, right? I mean, I'm not taking away her work, but essentially there wasn't something mainstream out there for surviving siblings. And there's only a handful of books, and there's a couple of support groups on Facebook, and I found a couple of websites, and I'm like, oh my God, no wonder I felt so alone. This really is not talked about. And I took to social media and started looking at the hashtags and everything because I've been such a presence on social media and stuff. Oh, nope, there's not a huge presence there either. And a lot of people don't even know what this term is. Hell, I did not even know what this term was, guys. I did not even know that we had a name. I didn't even know that we had a term, surviving siblings. I didn't even know that I had a place. I knew that my parents did. I knew that, a significant other did. I knew all of those things, but me, I didn't know. I finally felt in my 5th year, which I was like going through all over again. I'm like, oh my God. And then I also heard the term the forgotten mourners. And I actually heard that referenced on this other lady's podcast, but also through all these groups. And then the books that I started reading. And I was like, okay, like I was enlightened. So part of my spiritual side of things, I was also educating myself. So this was an educational and spiritual year for me, and a reconnection year to my brother, and just letting him know that, like, no, I'm here. Like, this is real. Like, I'm not gone. Like, I'm here. And So I just listened, I joined, and I read like crazy. I hit the books. And there's a lot of, out of these books, I'm going to actually list these as resources, but the one that I recommend, number one, is Surviving Sibling Loss, The Invisible Thread That Connects Us Through Life and Death. And the author is Dawn, so like Dawn the soap, Dawn. She's incredible. And her last name, I'm going to butcher it, and she's a friend of mine, so Dawn, I'm so sorry. Dawn DiRaimondo. Dawn, I'm so sorry. When you come on the podcast, I'll pronounce your name right. But anyway, so I read this book. Like, I devoured it. I think I was like on my bike or something, and I read all of the books that I could find on Amazon. I'm holding the book in my hand right now as I'm talking to you guys. I'm like channeling Dawn, and my connection to her story was just the strongest. And it's not necessarily the longest book, but there's also stories about other people in there, which I think is very powerful. Story is very powerful, which is partly why you're listening to this story right now about my brother and myself. And I was so inspired. This book really inspired me. The other ones did too. I again don't want to take those away because there's only so many out there, and I recommend reading all of them. And there's also some really good just like general death books to read too when you're trying to get through it if you're a reader. But if you're not so much a reader, stick to the Surviving Siblings ones because it's so specific what we're going through. That's my recommendation, and again, just my opinion, because I didn't get as much out of those. And sometimes I'm a reader. I'm an English Lit major and creative writing major, and I didn't always finish those general ones because they would focus on moms and dads who lost kids. They would focus on spouses who lost, significant others. They would focus on losing parents, things like that. And those are huge losses. But we were the forgotten mourners. Like, it didn't talk about us most of the time in there. And I was like, okay, like, I get these emotions they're talking about. I get the, like, quote-unquote stages of grief that they're talking about. And I believe in the stages of grief, but I believe that they're not necessarily always in order. And I believe that you go through them all over again. And I believe it's all a journey. So if you really want to connect, like, these are the books. And that was the book for me. I read it twice. And I'm probably going to read it again. And that was inspiring to me. I'm like, you know what? My brother doesn't need to be forgotten. And I remember the dream. I'm like, I need to tell his story. And that was like my first, like, I had been feeling compelled to tell his story for a while, but I just didn't know how. And like, I'm a writer. I've written things in the past, but every time I went to go write it, I felt like paralyzed because I didn't have all the answers. And you don't always have to have all the answers to move forward with things, but I did in this case. I needed to know what happened to him. But why was I still feeling paralyzed in year 5? I had the logical answers. Like, I knew enough to talk about this or write about it, what was going on with me. And here I'm having this very connected dream to my brother. There were many, but that was huge. And I'm meditating and I'm connecting to him. I'm reading these books. I'm seeing these groups. I'm seeing this lack of support. It's all kind of coming together now for me. Timing is huge in life, huge. And I felt it coming together, and it was all crashing upon me. And I read this specific book. I'm like picking it up again. I feel like I've got to channel this. Surviving Sibling Loss, The Invisible Thread That Connects Us Through Life and Death by Dawn. Dawn, I'm not going to say your name again because I'm going to butcher it. But last name, I'm so bad with these like long last names sometimes. But I'm sure you guys can understand that, so please forgive me on that. But this one I connected with, she lost her brother. She's the oldest. She understands. Only brother. And it's just what you connect with that matters. And so that kind of propelled me into the inspiration of like, okay. But within her book, and within multiple books, there is talk of mediums. And going to mediums. And I had thought about it for a long time, and I have seen an astrologer for many years. over half of my life. And he doesn't dabble in mediumship or anything like that. He's very logical, and, some people believe in astrology, some people don't, so, that's not what this podcast is about, but he's definitely given me guidance on how to, deal with certain things in my life. But me going to a medium is totally different. She did that in her book, and she talks about it, and there were several books where they actually shared that, and that was helpful, and some people shared their stories. And I had always just been apprehensive, not because I hadn't done it before, because I had been to mediums before, and I'm open to it. I think some of them are total liars and frauds, and I think some of them are super gifted and put on this planet to help people like us that are suffering and need our quote-unquote closure, which, I don't totally believe in closure. I believe in answers. They're here to help us, give us the rest of the answers that we need. This makes me so emotional. So that we can continue our journey. And so I decided I'm like, if I'm feeling this compelled by this book and this woman, I'm going to seek out her medium. What's the worst that happens? I don't get booked with him or what? Well, what do you know? I'm able to get in with him, and I decide I'm going to do it. And I had a lot of mixed emotions about it, because I thought, what if so many things, right? What if I find out things I don't want to know? What if I find out this? What if I find out he's angry at me? What if I find out he's disappointed in me? And then I just kind of shut all of that down in my mind, and I went into my heart, and I thought to myself, Maya, you know that you've been the one here. Oh, this is so emotional. This is going to be an emotional episode, just preparing you guys for this. And this is getting emotional too. So if you guys are not into mediums and you don't want to hear this, it's probably not your thing. But if you're into it, this was very cool. And, I shut it down. I just tapped into my heart, and I was like, in your heart that you have done everything right by your brother. You've done everything in your power. And when you needed to rest, and there were times you needed a break, you did that. It doesn't mean that you forgot about him or gave up. And when he came through in that specific dream to you, he's not upset at you, and you've not forgotten about him. You're going to keep him alive. And I just knew that somehow. I knew that. And so I was able to kind of, let that go. And so I saw this medium. Because of the pandemic, I had to do it virtually. So I saw him, I believe it was August, of 2021. And I can't really go into everything because some of it is about my family. And what I mean by that is, he shared some information that pertains to my family. So I do want to preface this with that. But everything about me, I will share. So we get on the phone, and he basically explains, if you've been to a medium before, they explain how they work. And I always go in, this is just me and advice to you if you're open to doing this. I don't go in guarded, I go in totally open, but I don't speak. Because if they're good and they know what they're doing, they're going to connect with spirit on the other side. If they're not good, they're just going to let you talk, and you're going to give them all the answers, right? I mean, it sounds pretty basic, but some people will just do that, and it's weird that people do that, in my opinion. But anyway, I do go in with an open heart and open mind, and you do typically meditate and open yourself up. But it doesn't mean you give them, the playbook, no. And definitely don't connect with them on social media before, all of that. I hope you would know not to do those things, but, to each their own. But come on, he would have known my story. So we start the session, and he immediately sees two of my grandparents that have passed. And again, for the sake of privacy of my family, I'm not going to speak about who they are, but he was 150% correct about who they were. And it was so freaky. And then he said, okay, I can't really talk about them anymore, though, because there is a young male stepping forward, like not stepping forward, like screaming forward. And I said, and he's like, does that make sense? And I'm like, yes. And he said, okay. He said, I feel like this is definitely, yeah, he's like, this is a young male. This is a relative. He says, has to be related to you, has to be a cousin or a brother. He said, I'm thinking it's more like your brother. And yeah, close relationship. And he explains the way he's hugging me, that's why. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. He goes, I feel like he was quite young when he passed. He described almost exactly how old he was. It was really trippy. He also then described that, he just asked me things to, reassure that this is my brother. He said a couple different things about he said, I feel like he struggled with some drugs and things like that. And he said very specific things that he struggled with, and they were all accurate. It was so weird, but it makes you know that this person is legitimate if you want to go with the medium path. And so I'm sitting there trying not to get too emotional. I'm like, yeah, this is accurate. And he said, his passing was sudden. He said, I feel like his life was taken from him. He did not take his own. Like, yes. And he goes, I feel like he wants justice for this. And, he basically told me that, I was right. And that he said he's tired on the other side because he's fighting, and he's fighting through me for his justice. It was so wild, you guys. Like, it was so true. And that part made me so emotional because it made me realize that everything that I have been doing is what my brother had been wanting. And I had to keep it together because I wasn't going to tell this medium any of this stuff until the end. I was just open. And he's like, your brother's so interesting because when he came through, it was he was like, you guys, he's like, the medium was like, excuse this language, but he was like, F you. He's like, I'm coming through. And I started laughing because that's so my brother. He's so boisterous. He's so extroverted. I mean, he makes me look not extroverted, and I'm extroverted. He's so boisterous. He's kind of crass a little bit with things. And so he described him to a T. And he was saying some little phrases that he would say to me. And that's when I knew. I was like, this is so weird. And he then also told me too, he was just to confirm, he was he confirmed the murder. He said he was taken that way. And he said, he was talking about the gunshot. It was really wild. And he had messages for both of my mother and my father, which I hope to share with them one day. And out of privacy for them, I don't want to share it on the podcast. But I'll share everything that they had for me, or he had for me. But what was so interesting about this is that the medium had deep messages as well for me. And he said that the reason, because I was struggling so hard, guys. This was almost past the middle of 2021, and I was really struggling. Remember, it's August, so we're almost coming up on our birthdays together. And medium doesn't know any of this yet. And he said, you're really struggling with this. He said, this is a really, really tough death for you because this is not just one death. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going, yeah, this is a really tough death for me, but yes, because I lost a really close friend in February, right after my brother passed. And then I lost a really close friend the summer after to a heroin addiction. And the friend that I lost in February after my brother passed was from testicular cancer. So I went through 3 losses. So I started to think that's what he was talking about. I was like, oh my God, I went through a lot of loss. But no, that's not what he meant. I didn't say that. I was just thinking that in my head. He said, the reason this is such a tough loss for you and you're feeling this so much harder and you don't need to be judging anybody else. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not judging anyone else, but he's like, or just kind of be, I think he said it in a different way, kind of give people grace about this. I'm like, okay. He's like, you didn't just lose your brother. He said, that was one loss for you. He said, you lost your best friend. And I started crying, of course. I'm gonna cry now. You lost your best friend. He's like, this was your best friend growing up? And he's like, and I see, like, he's with you. And I'm like, yes. And he goes, but also this is a soulmate. And he explained, like, how soulmates work, which is, like, a whole other podcast and a whole other thing. So if you're interested in how soulmates work, because we don't just have one soulmate. It's not a romantic soulmate, but, like, we have soulmates that are with us, and this is one of the deepest level soulmates that I can have ever. And my brother was all three of those things. So that's why I'm feeling this loss so deeply, and that's why my brother came down and we had the same birthday. Like, what? It, like, blew my mind and gave me these spiritual answers that I never could have gotten from Detective G, right? So I just sat there in silence. I couldn't believe it. I was like, he's like, does all of this make sense? And I started just tearing up. I was like holding it back, but I couldn't help it then. I was like, yes. He's like, there was a bond there that's just no one will ever understand. He was your brother, your best friend, your soulmate. It did not matter what happened through time or anything. And he knows that, he recognizes that. And, you know, he's like, he's not, whether you guys believe in reincarnation or not, most mediums obviously do, right? Because they believe that you reincarnate. So both my sisters had their children at the time. And so I was curious, you know, I potentially thought that maybe one of them had him come back down, and he said no. He said that was not the case. He said my brother was a very impatient person, and that my brother was connected to me and would be around me for the rest of my life and would be waiting for me on the other side, and that his, like, the thing he had to learn in life was patience. And I was like, this is so crazy, because he was the most impatient person I've ever known. Obviously did not confirm any of this until the end, but I'm only giving you a taste of it. There was so much more, which, again, I think I'll just have to write about this, but hopefully I'm giving you enough to let you know about how deep this loss was for me, and that really fulfilled the spiritual answers for me. And hearing the things he had to say to both my mom and my dad were really beautiful too, and I hope I get to share that with them one day. I hope they're open to it. I think they will be one day. And he also oh, I'm getting choked up, sorry. He also has a message for my sister too, and yeah, it's gonna be beautiful to give her that. And it was really a good conversation. And at one point, the medium, his name is Tim, and if you read this book, you'll figure out who he is. Tim said to me, he said, you know what, your brother is also telling me, and I'm also seeing this for you, is that you're going to be his advocate. And I'm like, what? And he said, yeah, he said, you're going to be his advocate and his voice. And he goes, I'm not sure how you're going to do that or whatever, but it's going to be like, you're going to be his voice, you're going to be his mission, and people are going to hear you all around tell his story. And you're going to change this, you're going to change things, and you're going to do a lot with this. I had no idea what he was talking about, but he told me that. Didn't know what that meant at the time, but I'm sitting here talking to you on a podcast right now, months later. So it was an incredible experience. If you're open to it, do your research, make sure it's a reputable medium. It can sound like a quick fix kind of thing, like you want to go to someone real fast, but it took me that many years, and I'm really spiritual into this kind of stuff. I've been seeing an astrologer for a long time. It took me almost 5 years to go to this person, and he was incredible. And literally, like, I would say 90% of the things he said made sense. There was like one thing he asked me about a friend, about my brother, and one more thing that I didn't know, but that doesn't mean they weren't true, because I couldn't have known everything about my brother's life, right? I mean, he was an adult. So, yeah. And then I remember leaving that, and that was like a daze, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, okay. So I remember taking that in, and that was a huge moment for me, because I received the spiritual answers, and I knew that my brother loved me and supported me. And one last thing Tim said to me was, he said, you're going to live a really long life. And I'm like, I am? And he goes, yeah, and your brother's going to have to wait for you on the other side, and it's going to drive him crazy. He goes, but you're going to spread his message. And I don't know what that is or what that entails. I just keep being told that. And here I am talking to you guys about this, which is wild. But of course, that part didn't really stick with me at the time. It was more like the part of he was my best friend, my soulmate, my brother, and like I was understanding why I was like the 5-year was hitting me. Also, in a lot of the books that I read, like 5 years is like a mark, like a big moment. And so I'm really glad that I did that for myself and did these things for myself. And as the year went on, I was like, okay, like continuing my journey, I decided to reach out to the author of the book I just talked about and connect with her. And I did. I ended up connecting with her, and we ended up becoming friends. And so she's an incredible person. Again, I cannot talk about this book enough. I think she's absolutely phenomenal. This book was great for me, and I think you need to find the book that you connect with, which is why I want to include a couple in the notes here so you guys can have resources and be a part of support groups and not fall into what I had, like, which was nothing, no support. I just felt completely alone. I couldn't believe when she like reached back out to me. I was like kind of fangirling. I was like, oh my God. And now she's the supporter of the podcast. And, you know, just to tease it, you know, as we're kind of coming to a close of this season, there will be a season 2, and she will be the first guest on season 2, talking about the book, talking about stories, and talking about her journey as a surviving sibling. So read the book. It's exciting. Yeah, you'll figure out who our medium is too, which is really cool. But that was an incredible part of this journey too, was connecting with her and making that connection. But that was kind of the tipping point for me. And then once it sat with me and the year went on, I realized, I'm like, I have to tell his story. I want to tell his story. I'm compelled to tell his story. It's our story. And I started to get to work. I really went back into the resources, and I really realized there was a need for this podcast. And I really tapped into myself and thought about, am I ready to really share this and put this out into the world and be this raw and be this open with everybody? And I don't think anybody ever is. I really don't. And I'm sure I've missed a lot of parts of the story, which is why I think I'll probably have to write about it so I can make sure I don't miss a thing. But I'll continue. I think I'm going to continue this journey. And I got to work. I got to thinking about, who's going to be the best producer for this, and, who's going to help me with this, because I definitely couldn't listen to these episodes back and edit them. That's also me being very raw and kind of opening up to you on the back end of all of this. And so that was the journey at the end of, 2021. And I then reflected back on my reading with Tim, and I was like, oh my God, like, he was right. I am going to be the voice. I'm like so compelled and obsessed with doing this. And so as this, journey continued, I started to think about my family, and how they would take me talking so openly about this, and about the good, the bad, the ugly, the sad. There's the good parts in this about me opening up and hopefully connecting this community of surviving siblings, the forgotten mourners like you and I, or if you're someone supporting that surviving sibling or forgotten mourner. And I hope that's the positive side of this. And I had to really weigh all of that. But I also had to look at my brother. This is for him at the end of the day. And this is for you. And this is for me. We need a place and we need a voice. And that's what trumped everything else. But out of respect for my family, I left the names out of the people, really everybody, because I do love my family at the end of the day, regardless of treatment that I've received or anything like that. And I want to be very clear that I don't think of myself as a victim of anything other than someone who, a victim of someone who was killed by a homicide, a victim of trauma, a victim of post-traumatic stress syndrome, a victim of those things. But I'm not a victim. I think I'm a fighter. I'm a survivor. I'm a surviving sibling. Just like you, or just like one of your loved ones. And that's why I'm doing this, and that's why I'm talking about this. And I'm really happy to close out this season, sharing this spiritual kind of episode and talking about, the resources that I read and getting my reading with Tim. And then, some beautiful things did happen out of all of this, creating this and creating, some communities and connecting with more people and connecting with more surviving siblings. And I've already, just launching the teaser. I launched the teaser on the day that my brother's death date, November 21st. I launched on November 21st, 2021. I was totally scared because, again, I was still, I don't really care what people think about me. I've dropped that after going on a ridiculous reality show. You stop caring what people think about you. But I really cared a whole lot about what my family was going to think, because I didn't want them to think I was going to drag them through the mud regardless of anything they've done to me. And I think there was a lot of anxiety there, and I had to really put that aside. I had to do another mindset shift, and I had to do another shift for myself. And I hope that you guys do that for yourself as well in your grieving process, and you do what you need to do for yourself. And I think it really paid off, because I'm at a place now where, I'm so happy to share that my youngest sister and I have, I have always supported her from afar. I've supported her, I'm so happy she's had a child. I'm happy for her. Happy for both of my sisters. I'm happy that they're happy. I love them from afar, but I am happy that, I'm happy to close out this episode, coming to a close of the season, that my youngest sister and I have reconnected. And I want to be there and help her as a surviving sibling and help her go through her grieving journey, because I think it's really important that we understand where people are. We accept them in their grieving journey. It doesn't give people the right to treat you a certain way, but if people can come back to you or come back and meet you and understand that you've got to grieve a certain way, then you can move forward with them. And I don't think she would mind me sharing this. She and I, again, recently, reconnected, and I've never held anything really against her at all. I love my sister dearly. She was 20 when this happened, and I give this advice a lot in these support groups. And, we're 10 years apart. It's a different experience. It doesn't make her experience more traumatic or mine less traumatic or anything like that. Or mine more traumatic just because I saw my brother. I'm just dealing with a different trauma than she's dealing with. And she is recognizing that. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. And I think it's a really beautiful thing that, she has a son now, and there's a different perspective. And I'm so excited to be there for her. And she said to me, because I told her, because we reconnected before this podcast first aired, the first episode, the trailer had already been out. So that's how I knew. I was like, okay, I guess they're cool with this. Well, some of them. Well, she was, at least. I don't know. And her exact quote to me was, you know what? You have to do what you need to do. I support you. If this is what you want to do, I support you. That's okay. And I think I'm probably mincing the words and not saying it as eloquently as she did, but the fact that she is supportive of it, that's a step in the right direction, and that's a beautiful thing. And so I want to give you guys that, when you're in a down period, I had nobody in my family. I want to give you guys hope. Your family can come to a different place in grief. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And it's the marathon of life. And you're going to be grieving for life. And I really want you to remember that. And there's no ending to this story. The ending of my story is when I pass to the other side and I see my brother again. And that's the ending of your story as a surviving sibling, is when you pass to the other side and you see your sibling again. But don't cut your story short. They want you to continue your story. I promise you they do, and I know it doesn't feel like it because, trust me, I didn't want to go on several times. And it's something that I've shared on the podcast. I had destructive behavior. I didn't want to live several times. It was hard. I was so brutal. It was not constructive behavior, but it's about how we change that. It's about how we move forward, and it's about how we surround ourselves with the right people. And I hope that you do that, and I hope that you find this podcast helpful and these resources helpful. And I'm just pouring so much love to you, and I thank you guys so much for supporting me and sharing these episodes. And I'm so happy that I got to share my hope and my reconnection to part of my family. And I have shared that I do chat from time to time with my dad too, but I'm most excited about helping my sister on her grief journey, but just having a positive relationship, because I know that's what my brother wants. But again, for all of you, I think it's most important to remember that it's your journey. It's up to you. It's up to you about how you grieve. It's up to you about how you share your story, when you share your story, what you need, what answers you need, how you get those answers, if you need the logical ones, if you need the spiritual ones, if you need to just forget about it for a while and take a break, take a rest. I wish I had someone that gave me the permission to do those things, because I never gave myself permission for any of those things. So I'm going to give you that permission. Maybe you'll listen. And hopefully you have someone in your life that gives you that permission to do that. But thank you again so much for listening. And just remember, this is not a negative thing, but there really is no such thing as closure. Just like our detective Good told us, there's really no such thing as closure. There's only answers. But here's what I add to it. But those answers are what get us through our grief journey and push us and propel us forward into the hope instead of the down times. Thank you guys again so much for listening. This has been an incredible experience, and I hope that you will join me in season 2 for your stories. Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.